right. What do we have here? We have for tonight Once Upon a Bounce. I believe it's about Tigger and Pooh. What do you think? All right. All right, JJ and JoJo. Time for sleep. So, it was a typical Tuesday morning for Tigger. He bounced out of bed, bounced through his bath, splashing water everywhere in the process, bounced out his front door, and hurled himself across the 100-acre wood in a series of leaps and bounds that carried him easily over even the tallest trees until he arrived at the home of Winnie the Pooh. As soon as Pooh opened his front door, before he could say so much as "Good morning, Tigger," or "My, aren't you looking particularly well today?" Tigger threw his arms around the portly bear and they rolled head over heels across the floor into Pooh's parlor. "Hiya, buddy bear!" shouted Tigger happily as he pinched Pooh's round cheeks enthusiastically. "Are you as happy to see me as I am to be seen?" "Hello, Tigger," Pooh answered. "I'm always glad to see you." He rubbed his face tenderly. "I'm even glad to feel you, most of the time." "So, what's for breakfast?" Tigger bounced into a chair, rattling the honey pot spread out on Pooh's dining table. "It's Tuesday, you know." "Is it really?" Pooh responded politely. "Then what exactly has Tuesday to do with you and me and breakfast?" "Why, it's Tuesday, the day after Wednesday," said Tigger with surprise. "It's the day I always come for breakfast." He tied a napkin elegantly around his neck. "One can't, after all, eat breakfast all by oneself when it's—" Tigger pointed a finger at Pooh Bear. "One," and then at himself, "Tuesday. Can one?" He waggled his eyebrows in delight and chortled, "Hoo-hoo-hoo!" Pooh was well aware that arguing about numbers only made him hungry, and he was hungry enough already. "No, one, I mean two can't, I suppose." He climbed onto the chair next to Tigger. "Oh boy," said Tigger, grabbing a pot of honey and pouring a more than large dollop of the sticky, sweet liquid down his throat. "I love this stuff," he mumbled when he stopped eating long enough to lick his lips. "Me too," Pooh said quietly, watching Tigger put down the now empty pot and snatch up a full one. Pooh had much preferred the days when Tigger had thought he didn't like honey. It had meant much larger portions for Pooh. "You know," said Tigger, after entering his third or fourth pot of honey, "I bet you love honey as much as I love bouncing." "Yeah," Pooh sighed as he gazed at the growing pile of very empty pots. "It always seems there's never enough of what we love the most." Tigger stopped right in the middle of a particularly messy slurp. Unaware of the honey leaking down over his nose, he gazed forlornly at Pooh. "Not, not enough of what we love the most?" Pooh, his face poked deep into distressingly empty jar, replied hollowly, "It seems so. Good things sometimes just seem to run out." Climbing slowly and carefully down from the chair, Tigger stood, flat-footed and awkward on the wooden floor. "Thanks for breakfast, Pooh," he said, "but I think I'll skip the rest of it. I'm not very hungry all of a sudden." Then, sliding his feet cautiously across the floor, Tigger walked slowly out of Pooh's house. Pooh, his face squinched in a puzzled frown, watched him go. He then surveyed the jumble of empty pots, crocks, and jugs scattered on his table. "Goodness," Pooh murmured to himself. "What would I have done if he'd been hungry?" For the next few days, the primary topic of conversation around the 100-acre wood was What in the world is the matter with Tigger? It takes him forever to get from one place to another, Rabbit observed. When she bothers to go anywhere, whistled Gopher. He seems so sad. He just sits around and mopes. And if you don't mind me saying so, Eeyore added, Tigger's no slouch when it comes to moping. So, demanded Rabbit, what are you going to do about him, Pooh? Pooh scratched his head and considered for as long as he thought was polite. Then he said, I give up. What? No one makes a friend feel better than you do, Pooh, said Piglet, taking Pooh's hand in his own. That's right, agreed Eeyore. Just find Tigger and do what you always do. Oh, well, said Pooh. I suppose I could do that. Of course you can, Pooh, said Rabbit, patting him on the back. That's why we're sending you. As Pooh wandered through the 100-acre wood looking for Tigger, he was thinking furiously, hoping he could remember what it was he always did. So deep in thought was Winnie the Pooh that he almost stumbled over Tigger, who was sprawled on the riverbank staring gloomily at his reflection in the water, totally unaware of what was going on around him. Pooh was so surprised to see him that he didn't have time to think about doing what he always did. He simply did it, blurting out a delighted to see you hello. Hello, Tigger. Yow! Shouted the startled Tigger, bouncing several feet into the air. Landing on his feet, Tigger threw his arms around Pooh and rested his head on Pooh's shoulder. Please, Pooh, boy, he gasped breathlessly. Don't ever do that again. Certainly, Tigger, agreed Pooh. But could you please tell me exactly what it is you don't want me to do? He thought. He pulled thoughtfully on his ear. I hope it's not what I always do, whatever that is. Just don't make me bounce like that, said Tigger. I haven't got that many left to waste, you know. You haven't? Asked Pooh, very much surprised at this news. How many bounces did you have to begin with? Well, said Tigger thoughtfully, I always figured it was one of those great big numbers that comes somewhere after 2. He leaned close to Pooh and continued in a whisper. But somebody told me once, I just remember who exactly, that good things just seem to run out sometimes. Pooh rubbed his ear thoughtfully. I heard someone say that once too, he mused. But I can't remember who it was either. So it must not be very important. Pooh crinkled his brow because brows were always crinkled when thinking was taking place. And Pooh was almost positive that thinking, or something very much like it, was what he was doing at the moment. Besides, how can you run out of something, Pooh asked slowly, when you don't run? You bounce. Say, responded Tigger admiringly. That's a pretty good question. Yeah, I know it must be, said Pooh proudly, because I certainly don't know the answer to it. What else don't you know, Pooh? Asked Tigger hopefully. Pooh was now much too excited to remember to crinkle his brow. If up means more, which I'm certain it sometimes does, he began. Sure it does, agreed Tigger, like stocking up on honey or dressing up or growing up. Then, Pooh continued, I don't know why bounces, which all go up, should ever end, should they? No, sirree! Hooted Tigger, joyously launching himself upward in one tremendous bounce. It was the most amazing bounce ever seen in the 100-acre wood. Pooh had to sit down quickly and lean back until he was flat on the ground to keep his friend in sight. The tallest trees in the forest suddenly felt like tiny saplings again, as Tigger sailed up past them, and birds were forced to fly on their backs in order to watch Tigger grow smaller and smaller as he went higher and higher and higher. Clouds were surprised by Tigger's passage that they thought for a moment that they were upside down and Tigger was falling because no one had ever bounced that high before. All in all, it was long past supper time when Tigger finally returned to Earth. But Pooh, hungry as he was, knew that waiting for his friend was the polite thing to do. "Yippee!" cried Tigger, shaking Pooh's hand so vigorously that Pooh was forced to bounce in excited little circles along with him. "You did it again!" "What exactly was it that I did?" Pooh wanted to know. "What you always do, Pooh boy," answered Tigger. "What you always do." "Ah," said Pooh, still not having the slightest idea what it all meant, but taking comfort in how familiar it sounded. "Well, you're very welcome." "I'll see you tomorrow for breakfast. It's Tuesday, you know," called Tigger, who was hopscotching across the 100-acre wood, bouncing so high that a flock of geese flying south for the winter started to follow him home. The smile faded from Pooh's face. "Breakfast," he muttered, thinking of his cupboard full of honey. "Tomorrow." Pooh sighed and grinned a lopsided grin. "Oh, bother." "Are you sleeping, Pooh?" asked Tigger as he looked deep into Pooh's wide-open eyes. "Why, no, Tigger," Pooh answered. "Are you?" "No! This is what happens when Tiggers do what Tiggers do best," he sighed. "We're just too fascinating to be sleepifying." Tigger leaned closer to Pooh. "Tell me, Pooh, what do you think when somebody mentions vegetables?" Before Pooh could answer, a large yawn overcame him. "That's all I wanted to know," said Tigger, grabbing Pooh's arm and pulling him quickly along through the forest. "Where are we going, Tigger?" gasped Pooh. "To find a bedtime story that does the job it's supposed to do," replied Tigger. The next thing Pooh knew, he and Tigger were in Rabbit's kitchen, sitting across the table from Rabbit himself. "Bedtime story?" Rabbit was saying in surprise. "All I know about bedtime stories is that I love to listen to them, but I'm not very good at telling them." Rabbit looked embarrassed. "I hardly ever get to the end, you see." "Why not?" asked Pooh. "I always put myself to sleep," Rabbit admitted. "That's just the kind we want to hear!" exclaimed Tigger and Pooh at the same time. "Very well," Rabbit shrugged. "If you insist." Good night, JJ. Good night, Joe.